I'm not a big fan of fad diets or labels. So I say that you need to have balance, and maybe one diet may actually work for me, but it may not work for someone else.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nafisa Sikandri, a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety-based disorders. It wasn't that long ago that I struggled with my own anxiety and had no idea how to manage it. But now I have control over my anxiety and overall mental health. I created the Mental Health Break podcast to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you do the same. Mental illness can cost you time and money. Ignoring your symptoms will only make the problem worse. Taking time out of your busy day to dedicate to improving your mental health can lead to long-term health and wellness. In this podcast, each week you'll learn tips, tricks, and proven strategies to help you regain control of your life, all while prioritizing your mental health. If you want to improve your life, regain control of your mental health, and feel empowered, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by the Beginner's Guide to Managing Anxiety. Learn how to manage your anxiety with simple, proven strategies from the comfort of your own home. In this mini self-paced course, you'll learn how to make lifestyle changes that can guide you towards better mental and physical health. To learn more, visit transforminganxiety.com/begin. I'm so excited to share today's episode with you because it's all about natural, practical solutions for better mental and physical health. Last week, for the first episode of this podcast, Dr. Gersh shared some amazing information about the connection between the thyroid and mental health. And today I'm joined by Zermina Akbary, who's a nurse practitioner, dietitian, and functional medicine specialist. This interview is from an Instagram live event I did with Zermina at the height of the 2020 pandemic. But because it's filled with so much great information, I wanted to share it with you all here on this podcast. It's a great follow-up to Dr. Gersh's interview from episode 1. Please check out Dr. Gersh's interview if you haven't done so already by visiting transforminganxiety.com/podcast. I won't let you wait any longer. Let's listen in to my interview with Zermina. Today we're being joined by Zermina Akbary, who is a registered nurse, certified nutritionist, and functional medicine specialist. I'm so excited to speak with Zermina today because she has so much to teach us about eating healthier and taking better care of our bodies and our minds. It's funny because I focus on nutrition during my sessions, so it's a lot of my patients are surprised when they first come in, and I start talking about nutrition, about what their diet is like, what are they eating for breakfast, how are they taking care of themselves, are they binging on sugar, because all of that impacts your mood and your anxiety. So as an anxiety specialist, I also really focus on this in my Transforming Anxiety course, which is an online course, to really teach people that you have to holistically take care of yourself, holistically take care of your body. For that reason, I'm so excited to be talking to Zermina about this, about everything we're going to be talking about. Talking about diet and nutrition is one of my favorite topics. And so having her here to talk about this as a nutritionist, as a dietitian, as a nurse, as a functional medicine specialist is very exciting. Nutrition and self-care, it's all related to mental health.
Hi, Lisa. How are you? It's so nice to see you again.
Good seeing you. How are you?
I'm doing good. Just adjusting to a new normal that we're all in right now.
Yeah. So I did say a little bit about how you're a registered nurse, a dietitian, and you specialize in functional medicine. So why don't you just give us a little bit more detail about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I've been a nurse for a little over 13 years now. I'm almost going to be giving my age away and how old I am. But I've been a nurse for over 13 years, and more recently, in the last couple of years, I got additional training in functional medicine, where I went through the Institute of Functional Medicine and got additional training with hormone issues, thyroid issues, and gut issues, which are very much related to a lot of the work that you do. So I'm a big fan of your work. And in addition to that, I also got certification in nutrition as well. So I do like to focus a lot on using that food as medicine approach first and foremost, and really making sure that we do have mind, body, and spirit all very much well connected with one another. So Yeah, that's pretty much what I do. And currently, right now, I have my own holistic practice where I primarily focus on a lot of women's health, specializing in women's fertility.
Wow, amazing. I have a lot of questions today for you, so I'm going to make sure that we have enough time for you to answer all my questions. But I struggled with hormonal issues, and for somebody to actually treat it from a functional medicine perspective is really, really cool. So right now, of course, with this COVID-19 and coronavirus and everything
Yeah.
that's going on, that everybody's issue right now is to focus on boosting the immune system.
Right.
But at the same time, a lot of people aren't realizing that all the stress that they're going through is also affecting their immune system. And so
Yeah.
not taking care of themselves, not sleeping. So I want you to just go ahead and address that if you can.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about stress, a lot of us are very familiar with the hormone cortisol. It's primarily our stress hormone, and that's actually produced in the adrenal gland, which are these two small glands that sit right above our kidneys. And it's responsible for producing that stress hormone cortisol. So your question was, how does cortisol or stress actually affect the immune system? Yeah.
Yeah, and then how people can boost their immune system,
Yeah.
including managing their stress.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of stress, I always say that the adrenal glands really love structure. And I think most of our routines now have been broken up. So now we're like, we're at home, we can't go to the gym, we can't leave the house. Our routines all over the place now. So, it's so important to make sure that you create a new structure and a new routine at home. So still waking up at the same time that you normally would if we weren't in this COVID crisis, and going and taking a shower and not just saying, okay, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and turn on the TV, sit down and watch Netflix.
For
And that's
hours.
okay, but it's really important to make sure that you start to build a new routine and not get into this sedentary lifestyle of just sitting around and being not having so much structure in your life. So the adrenal glands don't like it when one day you are trying to going to bed at 9 and the next day you're going to bed at 12, because then it becomes into this fight flight mode where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen the next day, so let me not go to, let me just be prepared for the worst, because I don't know if Zermina's going to go to bed at 9 today or she's going to go at 12. So it really likes that routine, it really likes structure. So that's really important to make sure that you have structure throughout your day to have a really proper immune system. Sleep is going to be a really big important one as well too. And the timing of when you go to sleep, I think it's very critical for patients to understand that you can be going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and getting 14 hours of sleep, but that's going to be very different from going to bed anywhere between 9 to 11, because that's really when your body is going to be in that repair reboost mode, is going to sleep an hour extra or an hour earlier than 12 o'clock. It makes a huge difference. So ideally, I tell all of my patients going to bed around 10 o'clock is going to be very ideal, because that's when the body's going to produce a lot of that melatonin, which is an opposite acting hormone of cortisol. And we know melatonin to be a sleep hormone, and it's very much needed for our sleep, but it's a very potent antioxidant. And there's a lot of research that a lot of cancer patients are given mega doses of melatonin because of its antioxidant properties. So it's really, really important to make sure that we're having adequate levels of melatonin production throughout the night, so that any damage that our cells have gone throughout the day, we're allowing the cells to actually repair by having adequate levels of melatonin through the night.
Oh, I am so religious about sleep and my patients. I mean, I'm so glad you're saying the same thing that I've been saying, so they're hearing it from somebody else, because people don't realize, if people realize how much good happens when we're sleeping, we'd be rushing to bed every night.
Yeah.
And like you said, it doesn't matter that you're getting 14 hours of sleep. It's the time that you sleep that's way more important than the amount of hours. I'd rather you go to bed at 10 and get up at 4 and than to go to bed at 4 and wake up at 2 in the afternoon. So yes, thank you for mentioning that. That is so important.
And I also want to point out too, with important sleep hygiene also is very important. I think the analogy that I like to use is like when you wake up in the morning, we're supposed to have really good healthy levels of cortisol. And that's kind of our, okay, let's go and task, let's go on and take on the day, get all of our tasks done. We have the energy to go to work. And then around sunset time, this is where that melatonin production comes in. And that happens when we wake up in the morning, we open the blinds, we look at the sky is blue. That natural blue light is going to help to signal our brain to go ahead and create cortisol. And so at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, or depending where you live, when that sun sets, the sky turns to be orange and red. And that red light, once it hits our eye, it stimulates the brain to go ahead and make melatonin. And so in the presence of cortisol, you're not going to be making melatonin. And so I always tell my patients, make sure that you're not on your phone, you're not having any exposure to any ambient light at nighttime, because if we're on our phones, I'm very guilty of this. And if we're on our phone, checking emails, laying down in bed, scrolling through social media, that blue light is actually not going to allow you to be in that deep, rapid eye movement sleep. And so it's really important that if you have to be on your phone at night before going to bed, answering those last emails, it's really important to make sure that you're getting those blue blocking light glasses, so that way you're not having cortisol production, because they work very synergistically with one another. If you're having cortisol production, melatonin is going to be very, very much reduced. So you could actually be physically sleeping, but your body's not getting that proper antioxidant that it should, because you're introducing that blue light at night.
Well, it's like alcohol. Alcohol and sleeping pills will put you to sleep, but the goal is to go into that deep coma-like sleep that does the cleaning and the washing and the consolidating and the repair of your body. We need that coma-like sleep to do that work, and it's the melatonin production, the peak time of it, which is between 10 to 2, we need to take advantage of. And we don't realize, or a lot of people don't understand, that we are naturally synced with the setting and the rising of the sun. So after 2 o'clock, 2 in the morning, the melatonin level is going to dip, and it's going to prepare you to wake up. That's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. So, and the older we get, our melatonin production isn't as robust as we like it to be. So I always like to use the example of babies. You know, newborns actually sleep 22 to 23 hours a day, and that's because they have the highest level of production of melatonin. And so they're producing all that much because they're sleeping for really long hours.
And they need that because there's so much change happening in their bodies.
Exactly.
Their brain is rapidly developing, but we need to take advantage of that. You're right. The delicate balance of hormones is a delicate balance. And so when melatonin production is high, cortisol is down. But a lot of doctors are prescribing melatonin. And for me, my understanding is that it is a hormone. And when we take in melatonin, we're disrupting our own body's abilities to make melatonin. So I'd like to stay away from melatonin as much as possible, but regulate your sleep cycle and have good sleep hygiene. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I always say you have to really start from really taking a natural approach. And in some cases, it's very much needed, because you really do need to reboot those receptor sites to actually make the melatonin. But I would say really try to focus on making sure you're having that good sleep hygiene, avoiding that ambient light 2 hours before going to bed, making sure there's complete darkness. I'm not a big fan of night lights, never have been.
Yeah, I mean,
so make sure that it's complete darkness. And I think that it's good initially, but overall, any supplement or hormone that you're taking for a prolonged period of time, it actually disrupts your own body's ability to make that. So your body kind of just gets lazy, where it's like, okay, well, you're supplementing it, so I don't need to do any of the work to go ahead and make it. So in more severe cases, when we're, going more deep diving into more hormones or anything like that, it can be very much needed, but not necessarily long-term. You want to really create that good sleep hygiene and not replace a supplement with bad sleep hygiene.
I think it's needed for people that are jet lagged, or for people that are significantly messed up in their circadian rhythm. Like you said, short term, to use it to reset your clock, but then you have to keep that consistency on your own. So, So thank you for that. And another thing that you're focusing on, which I am such a huge fan of, is the gut health. I mean, people don't realize that 90% of your serotonin and brain chemicals are in your gut. And the fact that you're teaching your patients about gut health makes me so happy, because that is the area we need to focus on so much. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Hippocrates once said that, let food be thy medicine. And so I think that's so important because a lot of the diseases that we are, more accustomed to, more of the chronic illnesses are started in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have at the end of your fork for breakfast, lunch, and dinner is going to really play a big part when it comes to your health. And so especially now when we're all very much hyper focused on our immune system, how do we boost our immune system? A lot of people find it very shocking that 75 to 80% of our immune system lives in our gut. So making sure that that terrain actually has that good gut microbiome, you're having those good soldiers to actually fight off any bacteria that's going to come in. So food is so incredibly important. And I find it really interesting. Before all of this, I would go to the grocery store every 2 to 3 days. And now we're going there once a week. And my husband's the only one that's going. And our diet hasn't changed very much. We try to eat a very plant-focused diet, making sure that we're shopping a lot in that produce aisle. And my biggest concern was, okay, now we need to stock up on foods that are going to last us for 2 weeks. And we're finding out that, he goes every week and he finds like, that's the food that's actually available. The food that's not available, that's all sold out, are the packaged foods, the pastas, the very processed foods, the canned goods. And those are the foods that you really want to try and stay away from, because that sugar, that gluten, all of that can really just stunt that immune or inhibit that immune function. So it's really important to make sure that you're not consuming those foods that are actually wear down your immune system, and focus on a lot of those immune boosting fruits and vegetables that you should be having, especially right now.
Well, when our gut is healthy, we're healthy. But what we don't realize is we have good bacteria and bad bacteria in our gut. And when we eat bad sugars, when we're eating foods with pesticides and hormones and antibiotics, we're actually killing our good bacteria and possibly empowering all the bad bacteria. And so it's like having a New York City where the gangsters and the mafia are in charge. You don't want that in your gut. You want to make sure that the good guys are empowered and healthy. So
and then in medicine, we call it there's a fancy word for that, and it's called prebiotics. And that just simply means there's probiotics, which is that good bacteria. Then there are prebiotics, and that just simply means the food that's going to feed that good bacteria. And that's just simply a lot of fiber. So make sure you're having a lot of those dark leafy green vegetables. That fiber is going to be really good for you to boost that good bacteria. But in times like this, if you do have some gut dysfunction and there's gut dysbiosis that's happening, it's really important to be taking a really good probiotic supplement that has, I would say, my recommended dose would be to one that has about 4 to 5 different types of strains in there. And then about 500 billion units in there would be really good. And then not sticking to one probiotic long term. You want to diversify it as much as possible. So not eating the same food over and over again. The same would apply to not taking the same probiotic. You really want to diversify those soldiers and that gut bacteria as much as possible.
Well, just like the world is full of diversity, our gut is also full of diversity. And we have 3 pounds of microscopic bacteria, 3 pounds worth. That's trillions and trillions. So more than inhabit the earth and more than people. And so we need to make sure they're eating. And if we're not feeding them that fiber, they're going to feed off of us. And so it leads to leaky gut. And so, yes, the prebiotics is very, very important, because that's their home. That's we're trying to make sure that they're getting the food that they need and their environment is healthy. So
yeah, and we do know now with all of the research that leaky gut leads to leaky brain. And so a lot of the work that you're doing with a lot of the anxiety and depression, that can actually all stems from your gut and your immune system there.
Well, the gut bacteria is responsible for releasing, like I said, that 90% of serotonin that's in we think is in our brain. It's actually in our gut. And when they're healthy, they're releasing that feel-good chemical. And so we're able to focus and concentrate, sleep better, and have good attention spans and less anxiety and depression. So it's so important. But besides the probiotics, you had mentioned getting a diverse strains of bacteria. We can get that from a pill, but can you talk about some of the foods that we can get diverse probiotics as well, or bacteria in our gut?
Yeah, so I always say full fat yogurt is really good if you don't have a dairy intolerance. Kefir is really important too, sauerkraut, any fermented vegetables. Our ancestors actually had this wonderful idea of actually fermenting a lot of their foods because there wasn't access to fast food the way we have right now. And so it's so important to make sure that we are consuming a lot of probiotic rich foods like yogurt. Kefir is important, sauerkraut, any fermented vegetables. Those are all going to be really important to have that yeast overgrow to go ahead and make that good bacteria.
I just want to say I recently discovered sauerkraut accidentally. My daughter wanted to buy it, and I was like, oh, that's disgusting. You don't want that, because I thought it was coleslaw.
Yeah.
And then I ended up eating the entire container myself. I'm so obsessed with it. I love sauerkraut.
My all-time favorite, second to sauerkraut, is actually kimchi. Kimchi is actually really good too.
I tried kimchi. It's too spicy for me. But we do, last week I was talking about my cookbook, and in my cookbook I have a recipe for fermented vegetables, the turshi that we have in Afghan food, and we've been doing that for years. And so for centuries, people have been fermenting vegetables, like you said, and eating it as part of their food, of their dinner routine. And so that helps with digestion, that helps with introducing diverse bacteria in your gut, and it's all good stuff. What about kombucha? What do you think about kombucha?
Kombucha is interesting. So it does have a really good amount of probiotics in there. My only problem with kombucha, because there's so much buzz around it, a lot of companies now are making it. You really have to watch the sugar content. And that sugar can actually wear down your immune system and, again, create that leaky gut. So making sure you're having it in moderation and not overdoing it. I personally am very guilty of this. I was on this obsession with kombucha because I'm like, oh, it's great for me. It helps with my digestive system. But it had about 9 to 12 grams of sugar in one serving. So
really? What kind were you using? Which brand?
A GTS brand, and some of them have the lower sugar amounts. But I mean, if you're trying to avoid sugar altogether, it's best to. It's not my number one go-to for probiotics.
Right. It does have sugar, because I've made kombucha at home. You have to use sugar to feed the bacteria in there. But the good thing is a lot of the sugar is digested by the bacteria. So, but like if you're avoiding sugar altogether, I would definitely say.
And if you're making it at home, that's so much better. Because you can actually control with the amount of sugar that's actually going in there.
Right. Yeah. And then you also mentioned earlier about hormonal health. I mentioned that I struggle with endometriosis, but back when I was struggling with it, nobody was talking about it. There was not a lot of information. And so I know the havoc it can cause in your life when you have hormonal issues. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because in my practice, a lot of women come in and if they're between age of 35 to 45, the doctors automatically prescribe antidepressants and anti-anxiety, when really it's their hormones changing, going out of whack. And so the antidepressants and anti-anxiety are not the treatment, and the hormones need to be balanced. Can you talk a little bit about that?
To your question about anxiety and then a hormonal disruption, it's very much connected to hormones. So when we're thinking about depression and anxiety, again, we're going back to that the hormone cortisol. I always tell my patients, cortisol is going to be your longevity hormone, meaning that it's going to actually dictate what your other hormones are going to do. In functional medicine, we have this pyramid, and on the bottom and the base of that pyramid, we have insulin regulation and cortisol production. On top of that, we have thyroid hormones, and then we have sex hormones. So sex hormones are going to be on the very top. So we want to approach it from a root cause perspective, and cortisol is going to be so important. And so if you're having high levels of cortisol, there's a mother hormone. I'll kind of just try to break it down in simple terms and not get too scientific. But there's a mother hormone called pregnenolone. And that pregnenolone hormone gives birth to your adrenal hormones, DHEA, which is a precursor to testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, and then cortisol, and then other hormones in there as well. In the presence of having high levels of cortisol, the body is going to shut down all of those hormones. And why? Because the body, you could be going through stress. Let's say you have 5 kids, you're a single mother, you're having relationship issues, you're having work issues, health issues. In that time, your cortisol is going to be really high. And so what's happening now is the body's perceiving any of those stresses as if there was a lion in front of you.
And so what happens? Your blood sugar needs to rise because we need to have sugar actually be inside of our muscles to be able to run away from that tiger or that lion. Your blood pressure is going to go up really high. But in that state, all of your other hormones, primarily progesterone, in a state of high cortisol, progesterone, we think of it as that progestation, it's that pro-pregnancy hormone, but it's actually our feel-good, zen, relaxing hormone. And that hormone, when we have high levels of cortisol, the body's saying, no way, we are not going to bring a baby into this environment. It is not safe. We need to not worry about reproduction. We need to worry about running away from this lion that's in front of us. And that's so incredibly important to make sure that we are combating that cortisol level, whether my first and go-to is diet and lifestyle. And it's not necessarily the amount of stress that's coming in, because our bodies are very much designed to handle that stress, and acute stress, it's totally fine. We need to have that inflammation, but in a state of chronic stress, that brings on so much inflammation and then just shuts down all of your other hormones. And so you really have to change your perception of stress. And so they did a study where they looked at third world countries and people or societies that didn't even know what the word stress was. It was more of, this unfortunate event happened in our lives. Now we're just going to go ahead and take it. It is what it is. It's from God. We'll get through it. And they didn't even use the word stress or anything like that. And they were actually more receptive to it and didn't have a lot of the comorbidities or any health risks because of their perception to stress. So it's really important to make sure that we are having a healthy perception on stress and signaling to your body saying, all is well, everything is fine, this too shall pass. And then your body's just going to say, okay, Zermina says everything's going to be fine, then let's go back to making our progesterone, let's go back to making our estrogen. And so that's kind of how you have to really make sure that you're having a healthy response to stress. And again, creating that structure around your day, doing activities that are going to combat that stress before your body starts to use its own internal resources.
Exactly.
Because the body is very smart in doing that.
It's all about our interpretation. Like you said, if you don't even think that it's stressful, then you're not going to react in a stressful way. You're not releasing that cortisol. But if you feel that it is stressful, even if it's a minor event, if you feel that that minor event is stressful, it can wreak havoc on your body. So change your perceptions, change your interpretation. But speaking of stress, I just interviewed my cousin last week who's about to have a baby. And so we were talking about postpartum depression and how to avoid that. Are there some tips you can give people that are struggling with postpartum or how to avoid even getting postpartum depression?
Get all the help you can. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That is that one time in your life where you need to take all of that help and really fill your cup as much as you possibly can. And take help from in-laws, from your siblings, from your parents, as much as possible. And communicate with your partner that this is a time in your life where your body's going through so many chemical changes. And then nutrition plays a really big part in that as well, too. So in order for the body to produce that progesterone, and the reason why a lot of women go through that postpartum depression phase is because through pregnancy, you're having so much progesterone production. Now, when you deliver that baby, your progesterone starts to actually sink and go down. And it is that, feel good, relaxing hormone. And so you really need to make sure you're having a diet that's high in fat. And that can be very controversial because I know a lot of people have this misconception that fat makes you fat. It's actually sugar. But with progesterone, in order for the body to produce that progesterone, it needs to make a precursor hormone called pregnenolone, that mother hormone that I talked about earlier. And then a precursor to that, we need to actually make cholesterol. And we get that from dietary sources. And these are going to be sources like avocados, your nuts, seeds, nut butters, olive oil. These are all going to be really important fats. The fats that I tell a lot of my clients to stay away from are going to be primarily dairy products, and these can actually really cause a lot of inflammation in the gut. So if you can tolerate it, I always say stick with full fat dairy and not the non-fat or low fat dairy, because that's really going to fats are essentially the backbone of all of your hormones. So it's really important to make sure you're consuming a lot of them. And there's a big misconception that fat makes you fat. It's actually sugar that does. not necessarily fats.
There's a really good movie on Netflix called Sugar Rush, and it talks about that, how we were lied to about by the sugar industry that fat is bad and sugar is good. And
Yeah.
so we do need to eat more fat, but canola oil should be avoided because it does create inflammation in your body. And I know a lot of people are using it. So
Yeah, the hydrogenated oil fats, and interesting, vegetable oil doesn't have any vegetables in there, so
right.
it's not the best oil, and you want to stay away from trans fat too. A lot of people cook with olive oil, and olive oil doesn't seem to have the best flash point, so it's great for drizzling over salads, but the minute you introduce high heat to it, then it's going to turn it into a trans fat, so just be mindful of that too for your listeners.
Right. I'm still a fan of coconut oil, but mostly I use avocado oil.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about avocado oil?
It's great. That's the oil that we use in our home, and it has the highest flash point, that smoke point. So it's my favorite go-to, actually.
Yeah, it's a great oil. Also, what do you think about homeopathic medicine? I recently read that Cuba is officially recommending homeopathic medicine as a treatment for COVID-19. And I'm a fan of homeopathic medicine, but I was wondering if you knew anything about it.
So my personal training and background, I've used homeopathy, but through under the care of a practitioner. So I personally don't have any training in homeopathy. Am I a fan of it? Absolutely. I couldn't explain the physics behind how it works. Yeah, it's a whole nother area in its own, and I don't have any professional background in that area.
It's a very hard thing to explain. It's a very difficult concept.
Yeah.
So let's see, what else do I have? Sugar. I know that somebody asked a question about monk fruit, and so I am a fan of monk fruit. I'm not a fan of stevia, but sugar can be very destructive for our immune system. And so I recommend alternative sugars to my patients when they're trying to get off of sugar, like even using monk fruit 50-50 with sugar, and then slowly increasing the monk fruit and decreasing the sugar until your body can get used to it. But speak to us a little bit about alternative sugars and how to get off of sugar addiction.
Yeah, so more natural sugars are going to be like maple syrup, honey, coconut sugar, but those can also raise our blood sugar. So if you are a diabetic, a lot of people assume, well, I can have the natural sugar. If you're a diabetic and you're having high glycemic index, and even if it's natural, it's still going to cause your blood sugar to spike. In terms of monk fruit, stevia, those have a very low glycemic load, meaning that it's not going to cause your GI to actually spike up so high. And so we do recommend that with monk fruit, just be mindful, because a lot of monk fruit, they have them with sugar alcohols, erythritol, xylitol. Anything that ends with an OL actually is a sugar alcohol. And that alcohol may not cause a spike in blood sugar, but it can actually create a lot of gut dysbiosis over a long period of time. Having it once in a while and may not be harmful, but having it on a consistent basis can create a lot of that leaky gut symptoms and then creating that gut dysbiosis. So making sure that you're getting monk fruit in its most purest form, and not one that is heavily mixed with erythritol and xylitol. That would be important to avoid.
That's really good point.
My go-to one is stevia. Stevia, if you just get the dropper kind, I think Trader Joe's sells that, and that seems to be really good because it's very natural.
And you need like a drop or two, not that much. I just don't like the bitter aftertaste.
Yeah, it does have, some people are not very fond of that bitter aftertaste, but you don't need a lot.
I was surprised at how low the glycemic index for dates were. And a lot of people use dates as a sweetener and also as a form of to get energy. So what do you say about dates?
It has fiber content in there. So, anytime if you're a diabetic or pre-diabetic, it's important to make sure at every meal. I think someone had asked a question earlier about how do I stop my sugar cravings? And I always say that if you need to have that sugar, have it with some sort of fat and fiber. So at every meal, you need to make sure that you're having fat, protein, and fiber to slow that insulin spike. And so it's really important to make sure that you're not consuming just sugar alone, because the brain is then going to get addicted to that as well. But date actually has that good fiber content in there. And so I always say just incorporate a little bit more fat in there, and that will actually slow that sugar response. So yeah, I think dates are a great sweetener alternative to use.
Yeah, I love dates, especially the big fat medjool dates. Those are amazing.
Yes. Those were the best.
They taste like little caramels.
Yeah, but now we're starting to see like a lot of people get really creative with it. They're adding walnuts in there, almonds in there, like almond butter in there. That's actually really great, and it increases the nutritional profile of dates.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. Good to know.
Yeah.
So the next question I have, multivitamins. So I recommend all my patients to take vitamins, but I know that there are a lot of people that are staying away from vitamins because a lot of them really are just filled with fillers and they're not really bioavailable. So for me, it's important if you're not going to get it from food, get it from food-based vitamins that are made with food, sweetened with food, and dyed with food. What are your thoughts about vitamins?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think vitamins certainly have a place. And supplements, I think that they should be used as supplements. They shouldn't be used to replace a unhealthy diet, and instead it should be supplements. So one example that I like to give is vitamin C. And in times that we're in right now, with vitamin C, it's one thing that our body doesn't actually naturally make. We actually have to buy it and get it in a supplement form or get it from citrus fruits. So that would be one thing where I would say really just caution and make sure you're getting it from a good source that doesn't have a lot of those preservatives and fillers, and speak with a healthcare practitioner that is well knowledgeable and well versed with supplements so that they can recommend the proper one. Vitamin C as an example, like the emergency, those ester ones, those are not really the best because it does have a lot of sugar in there.
They do.
So making sure that you are getting one that's going to be most bioavailable. I know that in China, they're treating patients, COVID patients, with hydroxychloroquine, with zinc and vitamin C IV therapy. And they're using vitamin IV, obviously, is the most bioavailable form. But second to that, liposomal vitamin C is going to be the best, or very close to getting IV vitamin C.
Is that sold that way as liposomal vitamin C?
So it's more in a liquid form.
Okay.
Not so much in a capsule, but yeah, you can get it in a liquid form and it goes directly into the cells. And so a lot of the vitamin C that we're taking, especially if you're mega dosing, your body can only absorb so much. And so the rest, you're just peeing it out.
Yeah. I know a lot of cancer patients do intravenous vitamin C and they recommend that for getting healthier.
Yeah, it really is a great immune booster, and liposomal is second best. So obviously we don't have access. All of us don't have that luxury to have a IV clinic near us where we can just go daily and get it. So having liposomal works just as good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then speaking of diet and some of the things that are trending right now are the low carb, the keto, the high fat. And for me, as far as the patients that I work with, since I do specialize in anxiety, I have a lot of patients that have anxiety, and a lot of them on low carb or keto diets are getting really escalating their anxiety because they're significantly cutting that carb. So what do you say about that, as far as what are your thoughts about these diets and about cutting such a huge, a necessary part of our diet, which is the carbs? We shouldn't, I say we need the carbs, the fat, and the protein for every meal, but some people are cutting all that out. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I think it's very personalized. I'm not a big fan of fad diets or labels. So I say that you need to have balance, and maybe one diet may actually work for me, but it may not work for someone else. So really just looking at your own individual biochemistry to see if that diet is something that you can benefit from. A lot of people do well with the keto diets, and then I've had patients where they didn't do so well. So I'm not a big fan of restricting foods. If you're generally someone who's healthy, I'm not a big fan of restricting foods, again, because when we're talking about the gut microbiome, you really want to diversify that. And a lot of these labs are doing in-home gut microbiome tests. And it's interesting, they're telling, if you've been on, let's say, a high-fat keto diet for such a long time, they get their gut results back, and it's telling them to eat the opposite of keto. And it's really just because they tested their gut microbiome to see what kind of bacteria that they're having and what kind of foods they're having. So let's go ahead and diversify it. It's basic knowledge. Let's diversify it and incorporate and encourage them to have foods that they don't typically eat. So obviously not having one ingredient and you're having that in high amounts for a long period of time, because you want to introduce that bacteria and the diversity into your gut. But as far as your question in regards to, were you asking about anxiety and then having high fat diets?
Well, the impact of cutting out carbs on increasing anxiety and escalating.
Yeah. So about carbs, I think a really good source is starch. Actually, a lot of people are afraid of it, but starch is actually needed for a good gut microbiome. So just pairing your foods is going to be really important. So I always say that make sure you're getting majority of your carbs from a lot of vegetables. Really focus on vegetables. A lot of the carbs that we know of, like breads and pasta, those are all very processed foods. So you don't want to be primarily getting your carbs from just that and then eliminating any fiber in there, protein in there. So do get your carbs from primarily vegetable sources, and then along with protein and fat as well.
No, that's really good advice. And yeah, eating carbs doesn't mean eating a lot of breads and pastas, but you do need carbs, and vegetables are a carb. And so making sure to have that balance in your diet, because like we said, food is medicine. And if we are cutting out the carbs that actually releases feel-good chemicals in our brain and releases that serotonin, we're missing out on that. And so I'm seeing a lot of people escalating in their anxiety. So
yeah, I do agree. And then even beans, legumes, whole grains, a lot of people fear that also. And that's just because it can be very hard on the digestive system to digest. So you have to make sure that you have a very strong intestinal barrier to be able to handle that. And I always say that make sure you're soaking and sprouting your beans and your grains as much as possible. So that way it's a lot easier for the digestive system to digest, because it's releasing those enzymes that are beneficial for digestion throughout that sprouting process.
Not just sprouting, but also using a pressure cooker. What I didn't understand, because I used to cook my beans on low heat for an hour, but that still preserves the catechins that cause digestive issues for people. And so having, and I'm probably not even saying that word right, but using a pressure cooker will kill that enzyme that can cause digestive issues.
Yeah, and that's lectin that you're talking
Lectins, that's it.
Lectins,
about tea.
So that high pressure cooking actually helps with that. So then that's another diet where people are like, I'm just going to go lectin free and not have any tomatoes or eggplant or a lot of these foods that have this enzyme in there. And that I don't think is necessarily the best thing to do, because there are so many other beneficial properties that that vegetable can consume.
It's a matter of limiting. And it's like for some people, they have a really hard time with them. And so, especially with beans, using a pressure cooker, it's so easy, it just gets rid of them. And so you can limit that.
Yeah.
So Zermina, John, please advise on how to control or stop sugar intake. What can I add to my diet to help with this?
Yeah, so that we talked about the making sure that you're consuming fat and fiber. And then I always tell, and if you say you can chime in on this, that the palate is very interesting. If you can actually create a habit where you eliminate that food for about 21 days, your taste buds will eventually change.
Yes.
So if you can stick to any habit for 21 days, then your brain's actually going to want to crave healthy foods after that 21-day period.
Yes, definitely. When I did that, food started tasting better because I was reducing that sugar, and I was actually I didn't want anything processed or sweet, and so that's the benefit of it as well. So the other one is, can you see that question? I have mild PCOS, insulin resistance, and everything is under control though. So they have how do I not take spiral?
Spironolactone is an androgen suppressor, and a lot of women with PCOS are prescribed this medication to help with that. That I would highly recommend to work with a practitioner. And again, any information that I give, I don't want them to substitute it for any medical advice. I think they should do their own research and make sure that you are under the care of a healthcare practitioner, but make sure that you are looking into saw palmetto could be actually a good one to suppress that, but spironolactone, it helps with androgen reduction. And with PCOS, making sure that you are having your thyroid fully checked. And that's not just the TSH, but you're also checking free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and TPO antibodies to rule out Hashimoto's. Hope that was helpful.
I didn't understand any of it. I hope she got it.
I hope she did also, but it would take a lot more time to explain it in a live like this. But yeah, feel free to shoot me a DM, and I'd be happy to support you in any way that I can.
And then the other question had to do with what are some good supplements to take for probiotics or gut health?
So gut health, depending on what it is that my go-to is just making sure you're reducing the anti-inflammatory foods, which are going to be dairy, gluten, and sugar. Those are going to be the three main ones. Corn is another big one as well. And then introducing foods that have that good gut bacteria, that good probiotic content, which we talked about earlier, which is sauerkraut, fermented vegetables, a lot of prebiotic foods, a lot of fiber, and just creating a lot of diversity in your foods is going to be really important.
Yes. And there are some brands that I like, and Jarrow makes really good probiotics. I like the company. So I'm sure you have other companies that are.
Yeah, my go-to is Megaspore probiotics. The reason why I like them, because they also have a good amount of antioxidants.
Where do you get that from?
It's a prescription. It's a practitioner grade formula, so you have to go through a practitioner to go ahead and get that. But on my page, I have a full script online dispensary for my patients. So if you're interested in that, I have that in my favorites, and you can log on and create an account on Full Script and get that supplement.
Awesome. The brand Garden of Life for vitamins, is that good? What do you think about Garden of Life?
Garden of Life was bought out by Nestle. I personally don't buy any supplements from them. I really have to look at each individual supplement and see what the ingredients are, what that supplement actually entails. So it's a very generic question. I'd have to, I wouldn't be able to provide a very detailed answer to that, because I'd have to look at each individual supplement to see where they're sourcing vitamin C from and other supplements and other ingredients in there.
I'm so sad that a lot of really good companies that have started out having good intentions, these big mega corporations are buying them out, and then we don't know what the quality will be after that. What's your thoughts on 1 meal a day and keto combined?
Yeah, again, so really look at your cortisol levels, because even when you're fasting, that could actually be a stressor on your body. So if you have normal and healthy cortisol levels, you can check your cortisol levels by blood, but that's only just giving you one marker of where your cortisol levels are throughout that day. My favorite is the Dutch hormone test, and you can also do a 4-point saliva test to actually give you a nice graph of what your cortisol curve looks like throughout the day. Mm-hmm. And so not eating, fasting, I know intermittent fasting is a really big thing, but it's really important to make sure that you have healthy cortisol levels, because you don't want to add added stress onto the body, and not eating could be another stressor too. But generally speaking, for someone who does have healthy cortisol levels, I think fasting is incredible, and your body does metabolically change drastically when you are fasting and having 1 meal a day. Our bodies are not designed to be constantly eating all the time and snacking in between meals.
Right. I heard somebody say that we should space out our meals to 3 to 4 hours between each meal to give our body a chance to digest and process. And a lot of people are constantly eating and snacking, and they're into 5 or 6 meals a day.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
I'm not a fan of it. And I think if you are wanting to reach weight loss goals, that, your body in that state of eating and snacking all the time, it's not going to burn any fat. And that's only going to happen in a state of fasting. So I say make sure you're getting your 3 meals and eating them at a proper time and not snacking in between. I always tell my clients the state of their health, of how I know if they're really healthy or not, if I tell them to do a 12-hour fast. If they feel like they're having these hangry emotions and they really need to eat and their blood sugar is dropping, that's a sign that they are metabolically challenged in that way, where we need to really work on the gut. Because when you are fasting, your body should actually be using its own reserves to have that energy and feel not so tired because you're not eating.
Definitely. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, if we give our body that chance, it'll process the food and the sugars. in our system. We did have one last question, and she was asking about, should we go cold turkey on giving up sugar, or gradually give up sugar?
Yeah, it's hard. I would say that sugar is probably one of the biggest culprits with a lot of the health issues that 90% of America is facing. So I would say if you're able to go cold turkey on it and not necessarily deprive yourself, but replacing it with natural alternatives, that would be a better approach as opposed to let me just cut it out completely. Caffeine is one example. I don't necessarily tell my clients to cut out caffeine. If you've been used to having 5 cups of coffee a day, you don't want to have the next day and just go ahead and cut it out completely. So you find that you're more successful in eliminating that coffee or that sugar long term if you slowly taper yourself down. And just be kind to yourself and not put so much pressure on yourself, and understand that it's a process of removing that.
Well, it's an addiction. The caffeine is an addiction. Your brain gets used to a certain amount of chemical. And so when you're pulling it out, it goes through withdrawal. The same with sugar. Sugar and caffeine are 2 of the most addicting chemicals that we have in our lives. And it's everywhere, and it's socially acceptable. So it's very difficult to get off of it. And doing it gradually and slowly would be a much better way, I think, too.
Yeah, I agree.
And I did want to say about caffeine. Coffee causes jittery effects on the body. And so for people that have anxiety, it makes their anxiety worse. What are your thoughts about caffeine and coffee intake, especially for people that have anxiety?
Yeah, so caffeine, again, it's a stimulant, so it's a drug. And so that cortisol production, again, whatever little cortisol you have, or let's say you have someone who's been having high cortisol and then that's flattened out, the adrenal glands, anytime you drink caffeine, it's actually going to try to squeeze out as much of that cortisol as possible. And so a lot of us can become so immune to it because now you have such high levels of cortisol that it's not really doing anything to you at that point. So I don't find it to be the best form of drink to be using because of that cortisol production. And so again, when you're thinking about cortisol being your longevity hormone, and it's the hormone that dictates all of your other hormone production, you really want to be mindful of that and making sure you're keeping your cortisol levels at bay and not consuming so much caffeine. With caffeine, I will say having 1 cup a day is not going to be harmful. It's not so much, it's important to consume just that 1 cup, but also when are you consuming that 1 cup of caffeine? Is it first thing in the morning? Is it 4 o'clock in the afternoon? In the morning, like I mentioned, your body's going to produce that natural production of cortisol when you open up your blinds and look at the sky. You don't want to be reaching for your cup of joe first thing in the morning, because what it's going to do, it's going to actually stimulate your cortisol production. And so you're not allowing your body to naturally produce that cortisol. And so my biggest advice is wait about 2 hours after waking up to have your cup of coffee. Allow your body to make its own cortisol. Have your caffeine. If you're waking up at 6 in the morning, anywhere between 8 to 9 would be a good time to have that cup of coffee, because you're allowing your body to make its own cortisol. You have your cup of coffee, and then around 12 to 2 is when your cortisol levels naturally are supposed to decline. So if you're having that cup of coffee at 4 o'clock in the afternoon,
Good luck sleeping.
Yeah, melatonin's not going to be produced.
Right.
So they have it before 12 noon and not first thing in the morning waking up.
I think what you're saying is kind of controversial for people. I've never had a cup of coffee personally, but I know people can't function unless they have it first thing in the morning. So what you're saying might not make a lot of people happy.
Yeah, I was actually a coffee drinker for quite a number of years, and I would have about 10 cups, and those 10 cups weren't doing anything for me.
Wow.
Yeah. So my cortisol levels at one point were through the roof, and then they flatlined because of the amount of caffeine I was drinking.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I know I'm very sensitive. Like when I used to drink soda, and that was years ago, if I had it at 1 or 2 in the afternoon, I could not fall asleep until 1 or 2 at night. So, because it would keep me wired.
Yeah. And then over time, it doesn't have that, energy effect on you, because your body's just kind of gotten used to it. And now it's like, well, give me something else to stimulate me, because that's not doing it anymore.
Right. But this has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I've learned so much. Thank you for answering all my questions.
Of course, Nafisa. Yeah, if anyone else has questions and we didn't get to it, feel free to send me a message and I'll try my very best to get back to you guys in a timely manner.
Tell us your Instagram handle.
It's living_holistic, and holistic is spelled WHOLELISTIC.
Well, thank you so much.